Before watching, please press like to support me in producing more stories. This helps in spreading the video and reaching more people. Thank you for your support and enjoy watching. In 2012, I found myself stationed at Wrangell St. Elias National Park in Alaska, the largest national park in the United States. My name is Leopold Kincaid, and I've been a park ranger for most of my adult life. I grew up in a small town in Montana, where the wilderness was both a playground and a teacher. The solitude of the mountains always appealed to me more than the bustle of city life. My colleagues often joked that I preferred the company of trees to people, and they weren't entirely wrong. One crisp morning in early September, I was assigned to check on a remote outpost near the Canadian border. The area was known for its rugged terrain and was seldom visited by tourists. My supervisor wanted me to assess the conditions of the trails and report any signs of illegal hunting or trapping. It was a routine task, one I'd done countless times before. I set out at dawn, the sun casting a golden hue over the snow-capped peaks. The air was thin but invigorating, filling my lungs with each deep breath. As I navigated the winding paths, I couldn't help but admire the untouched beauty around me. The trees stood tall like silent guardians, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind. About 4 hours into my hike, I noticed something unusual. The forest grew eerily quiet. The familiar sounds of chirping birds and rustling leaves had ceased. It was as if the wilderness was holding its breath. I brushed it off, attributing the silence to my overactive imagination. Continuing along the trail, I stumbled upon a campsite. At first glance, it seemed abandoned. The tent was pitched haphazardly, and equipment was strewn about carelessly. Approaching cautiously, I called out, "Hello, this is Ranger Kincaid. Is anyone here?" There was no response. Examining the site, I found a backpack containing a wallet. The ID belonged to a man named Victor Delgado from Anchorage. He didn't have any permits for camping in this area, which was concerning. More alarming was the state of the campsite itself. Food containers were open, and a fire pit was left smoldering, both violations of park regulations. I radioed back to the station. "Dispatch, this is Kincaid. I have found an unauthorized campsite belonging to a Victor Delgado. No sign of the individual. Over." "Copy that, Leo," came the reply. "Proceed with caution and keep us updated. Over." I decided to search the immediate area for any signs of Victor. As I moved deeper into the woods, I noticed claw marks etched into the bark of several trees. They were high up, about 8 feet from the ground, and spaced irregularly. Bears were common in these parts, but these marks didn't match any I'd seen before. Further ahead, I found scraps of torn clothing snagged on a bush, flannel fabric stained with what looked like dried blood. My stomach tightened. I had a sinking feeling that something was terribly wrong. "Dispatch, I've got possible signs of a struggle. Blood on clothing fragments. Requesting backup and a search team. Over." "Understood, Leo. Backup is en route. Estimated arrival in 3 hours. Stay safe. Over." 3 hours felt like an eternity under the circumstances. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and a chill ran through me despite the midday sun. I pressed on, following a faint trail of disturbed foliage. The ground was uneven, and footprints were obscured by the dense undergrowth. Suddenly I heard a faint sound, a low, guttural noise that I couldn't quite place. It was unlike any animal call I was familiar with. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. Moving quietly, I approached the source of the sound. I came upon a clearing, and what I saw made my blood run cold. In the center lay the remains of what could only be Victor Delgado. His body was mangled beyond recognition, limbs twisted at unnatural angles. Deep gashes crisscrossed his torso, and his face was contorted in a grimace of sheer terror. Surrounding him were remnants of other animals, rabbits, deer, even a moose, all mutilated in a similar fashion. I struggled to keep my composure as I radioed in. "Dispatch, this is Kincaid. I've located Victor Delgado. He's deceased. The scene is... it's bad. Possible animal attack, but it's unlike anything I've ever seen. Over." "Leo, backup is still 2 hours out. Do you need to evacuate?" Over. I considered my options. Protocol dictated that I should wait for backup, but something compelled me to stay. Perhaps it was a sense of duty or a desire to find answers. I'm going to secure the area and see if I can find any clues about what happened. Over. Proceed with extreme caution. Keep the line open. Over. As I surveyed the gruesome scene, I noticed footprints leading away from the clearing. They were large and oddly shaped, resembling those of a wolf, but much larger and with elongated toes. I took photographs with my phone, documenting everything for the investigation. Following the tracks, I descended into a ravine where the vegetation grew thicker. The canopy above blocked out much of the sunlight, casting the area in shadows. The air was heavy, and each step seemed to echo unnaturally. Out of nowhere, a figure darted between the trees ahead. It was quick, almost a blur, but I caught a glimpse. The creature moved on all fours, but had the musculature of something that could stand upright. Its fur was matted and dark, blending seamlessly with the surroundings. My heart pounded as I realized I might be tracking the very thing that killed Victor. I gripped the handle of my utility knife, the only weapon I had on me, silently cursing myself for not bringing a firearm. I heard the sound again, a low, menacing noise that sent a shiver down my spine. The creature emerged from behind a tree about 20 yards away, and this time I saw it clearly. It resembled a wolverine, but was at least the size of a grizzly bear. Its eyes were small and black, its snout elongated, with sharp yellowed teeth protruding even when its mouth was closed. Muscles rippled beneath its coarse fur, and its claws were long and curved, designed for ripping flesh. For a moment we locked eyes. There was an intelligence there, a calculated awareness that this was not a mere animal acting on instinct. I took a cautious step back, maintaining eye contact, hoping not to provoke it. Without warning, it charged. I turned and ran, adrenaline fueling my sprint back up the ravine. The creature was fast, faster than anything that size should be. I could hear it gaining on me, the sound of its massive paws pounding the earth. Desperate, I veered off the path and scrambled up a rocky incline, hoping the uneven terrain would slow it down. Reaching the top, I spotted an old cabin, a relic from the gold rush era, partially hidden by overgrown shrubs. I dashed toward it, throwing myself against the rickety door. It gave way, and I stumbled inside. The interior was dim, filled with decaying furniture and the smell of damp wood. I searched frantically for anything I could use as a weapon. Finding an old rifle mounted above the fireplace, I grabbed it and checked the chamber. Luck was on my side. There was a single bullet left. I positioned myself near a window, trying to steady my shaking hands. The creature circled the cabin, its heavy footsteps audible over the creaking of the old structure. I caught glimpses of it moving past the gaps in the wooden walls. It was toying with me. Suddenly the window shattered as the creature's massive claw ripped through. I fired instinctively. The bullet struck its shoulder and it let out a sound that was a mix of a roar and a scream. It retreated momentarily, giving me a sliver of hope. Knowing the rifle was now useless, I barricaded the door with a broken table and searched for an escape route. The cabin had a cellar door, likely leading to an old root cellar. I pried it open and descended into the darkness. The air was cold and musty. Feeling along the walls, I found a tunnel at the back, perhaps an old escape route miners used. With no other options, I ventured in, the narrow passage forcing me to crouch. Behind me, I heard the creature tearing through the cabin above. It wouldn't be long before it discovered the cellar. I moved as quickly as the confined space allowed, the tunnel winding deeper into the earth. After what felt like an eternity, I saw a faint light ahead. The tunnel opened up to the side of a hill overlooking a river. I emerged, gasping for fresh air, but my relief was short-lived. The creature stood across the river, its eyes fixed on me. Blood oozed from the wound in its shoulder, staining its dark fur. It began to wade into the water, unbothered by the swift current. I scanned the area for anything to defend myself. On the ground nearby was a rusted bear trap, likely left by poachers. I set it up at the riverbank, hiding it under a layer of leaves and debris. Backing away, I picked up a hefty branch and waited. The creature emerged from the river, water cascading off its massive frame. It moved toward me, each step deliberate. As it closed the distance, its front paw landed squarely on the concealed trap. The metal jaws snapped shut with a resounding clank, piercing its flesh. The creature let out a deafening howl, thrashing violently in an attempt to free itself. Seizing the opportunity, I struck its injured shoulder with the branch. The makeshift weapon broke on impact, but the force drove the creature back toward the river. It stumbled, the weight of the trap unbalancing it. With one final push, I shoved it into the water. The current was strong, and the added weight of the trap pulled the creature downstream. I watched as it disappeared around a bend, the sounds of its struggle fading into the distance. Exhausted, I collapsed on the riverbank. My radio crackled to life. "Leo, this is dispatch. Backup is arriving at your last known location. What's your status?" "Over." I mustered the strength to respond. "This is Kincaid. I'm about half a mile east of the outpost, near the river. Encountered an aggressive animal. Victor Delgado is confirmed dead." "Over." "Understood. Medics are on the way. Hang tight. Over." Within 30 minutes, a team of rangers and medics arrived. They tended to my minor injuries and escorted me back to the main station. I provided a detailed report of the events, though I could tell some of my colleagues were skeptical about the creature I described. A search team was dispatched to retrieve Victor's body and to look for any signs of the animal. They found the campsite and the gruesome scene, but reported no traces of the creature. The bear trap was recovered downstream, mangled as if torn apart by immense force. Over the following days, park authorities launched an investigation. Wildlife experts were brought in to analyze the claw marks and footprints. The consensus was inconclusive. They couldn't match them to any known species in the region. Rumors began to circulate among the rangers. Some thought it was a rogue grizzly or a wolf hybrid. Others whispered about cryptids and creatures from indigenous folklore. The official report cited a rare bear attack, urging caution in remote areas of the park. As for me, I returned to my duties, patrolling the vast wilderness of Rangel St. Elias. The memory of that day remained vivid, a stark reminder of nature's unpredictability. Weeks later, while reviewing trail camera footage from various locations, I came across something unsettling. In one of the clips, dated 2 days after the incident, a shadowy figure moved swiftly past the camera. It was brief but unmistakable, the same creature I had encountered. I brought it to the attention of the authorities, but technical issues had corrupted the file, rendering it unusable as evidence. Without concrete proof, there was little that could be done. Life in the park continued as usual. Tourists came and went, unaware of the lurking danger that possibly roamed the depths of the wilderness. Warnings were issued about staying on designated trails and reporting any unusual sightings. One evening, as I was closing up the station, a local hunter named Jeremiah approached me. He was an older man, rugged and seasoned by years in the Alaskan wilds. "You're Leo Kincaid, right?" he asked. "That's me. What can I do for you?" "I heard about your run-in up near the border. Thought you should know, you're not the first to see that beast." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh? You've seen it?" "Not personally, but stories have been around for generations. They call it the Amarok, a giant wolf that hunts alone. It's said to be a guardian of the land, striking down those who disrespect it." "I'm not one for legends," I replied, though his words intrigued me. "Legend or not, be careful out there," he said before walking away. I pondered his warning, but remained grounded in reality. Whether the creature was an undiscovered species or something beyond explanation, one thing was certain: it was dangerous. The following morning, a new assignment came in. Hikers had reported strange noises near Mount Drum. As the most experienced ranger available, I was tasked with investigating. Packing my gear, I prepared to venture once more into the unknown, ever vigilant of the mysteries the wilderness might unveil. I never thought much about solitude until I took the assignment at Denali National Park in Alaska back in 2011. My name's Owen Mitchell, and I've been a park ranger for a few years now. The vast expanse of wilderness up here is something that both humbles and exhilarates you. There's a kind of quiet that settles into your bones, a stillness that's hard to find anywhere else. I grew up in a small town in Maine, where the tallest thing around was the church steeple. The forests there were nothing compared to the endless stretches of pine and tundra in Denali. I moved here looking for a change of pace, maybe even a bit of adventure. On my days off, I'd hike trails that hadn't seen footprints in weeks, fishing rod in hand, hoping to catch dinner and a good story. One morning, I was assigned to check on some remote cabins used by researchers during the summer months. Winter was closing in, and we needed to make sure everything was secured before the heavy snows made the area inaccessible. My colleague, Laura Jenkins, was supposed to join me, but she'd called in sick with the flu. So I packed up my gear, loaded the snowmobile, and headed out alone. The ride out was smooth enough. The sky was a pale gray, the kind that makes you wonder if the sun ever truly rises here. The trees stood tall and silent, their branches weighed down by fresh snow. Occasionally I'd spot a hare darting across the white canvas or catch the distant call of a raven. After a couple of hours, I reached the first cabin. Everything seemed in order. Windows locked, no signs of forced entry, supplies untouched. I noted it all on my checklist and moved on to the next one, about 5 miles deeper into the woods. As I approached the second cabin, something felt off. The door was ajar, swinging gently in the icy breeze. I parked the snowmobile and approached cautiously. "Hello? Anyone here?" I called out, half expecting a fellow ranger or maybe a lost hiker seeking shelter. There was no reply. Inside, the cabin was in disarray. Chairs were overturned, papers scattered across the floor, and a strange musky odor permeated the air. It smelled like damp earth mixed with something metallic. I pulled out my flashlight and swept the beam across the room. Claw marks etched deep into the wooden walls caught my eye. 3 parallel lines, too wide for a bear and too deep for a wolverine. I radioed back to the station. "This is Owen at Cabin 2. I've got signs of forced entry and possible animal activity. Over." Static was my only answer. I checked the device, tapped it a few times, but the signal was dead. "Great," I muttered. "Just great." Stepping back outside, I decided to inspect the perimeter. The snow around the cabin was disturbed, but not in any way I could easily read. The tracks were erratic, overlapping, and unlike any animal prints I'd seen before. They were large, almost oval, with what seemed like 4 toes ending in sharp indentations. Claws, maybe. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Alaskan air. A joke came to mind about how I moved to the coldest place possible to avoid getting cold feet, but it fell flat even in my thoughts. Determined to finish my duty, I decided to head to the third and final cabin, about 7 miles further in. If something dangerous was out here, I needed to know. The trail was rougher, less maintained. Branches reached out like skeletal hands, scraping against my jacket as I pushed through. About halfway there, the snowmobile sputtered and came to a halt. I tried the ignition. Nothing. Out of fuel. Should have checked the gauge, genius, I scolded myself. I weighed my options. Turning back would mean trekking several miles on foot, but pressing on to the next cabin would at least offer shelter and possibly a working radio. I grabbed my backpack, tightened the straps, and moved forward. The forest grew denser, the trees crowding together as if sharing secrets. The silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of my boots against the snow. Then in the distance, I heard a sound, faint but distinct, a sort of chittering, like the murmurs of a crowd heard through a wall. I paused, straining to listen. The noise stopped. Shrugging it off as the wind, I continued. But the sound picked up again, louder this time, seeming to come from all around me. I couldn't pinpoint a direction. It was disorienting, like being in a room with speakers hidden in every corner. "Hello? Is someone out there?" My voice sounded small amidst the towering pines. No answer came, but the noise ceased once more. I felt uneasy, like I was the punchline in a joke I didn't understand. I picked up the pace, eager to reach the cabin before nightfall. As the light began to fade, I finally saw the outline of the third cabin. Relief washed over me. The structure looked intact, smoke even wafted gently from the chimney. Maybe someone's home, I thought. I knocked on the door. "Anyone in there? This is Ranger Owen Mitchell." Silence. I tried the handle, it turned easily. Stepping inside, warmth greeted me, along with the comforting crackle of a fire. But the cabin appeared empty. A pot of something aromatic simmered over the hearth. On the table sat a mug of steaming tea. The whole scene was unsettling, like arriving late to a party where everyone had just stepped out. "Hello?" I called again, more cautiously. Then I saw it, a notebook lying open on the desk, pages filled with hurried handwriting. Curiosity got the better of me. I approached and began to read. Day 12. The creature is more intelligent than we thought. It watches, studies. Last night it mimicked Jacob's voice. We almost opened the door. I flipped back a page. Day 11. We've barricaded the doors and windows. Food supplies are low. The radio isn't working. Sarah is starting to panic. A cold knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't a research team I was aware of. I turned another page. Day 13. If you're reading this, we didn't make it. The creature can imitate sounds, perhaps even voices. Do not trust anything you hear outside. Do not go into the woods at night. Just then, a soft knock came at the door. I froze. "Owen, is that you?" A woman's voice called out. Laura's voice. My mind raced. Laura was sick back at the station, over 30 miles away. There was no way she could be here. "Owen, please open the door. I need help." I backed away, heart pounding. The door rattled as the knocking grew more insistent. "Let me in, it's cold out here." I glanced around for a weapon, anything. Grabbing a fireplace poker, I positioned myself near the back of the cabin. The door handle twisted slowly. I watched in horror as it opened, revealing not Laura but something else entirely. It stood upright like a human but was covered in coarse matted fur. Its face was elongated, resembling that of a hyena but with patches of bare skin stretched tight over protruding bones. Sharp teeth glinted as it pulled back cracked lips into a grotesque approximation of a smile. It stepped inside, moving with an unnatural grace. The creature tilted its head, eyes reflecting the firelight with a predatory gleam. "Stay back!" I shouted, brandishing the poker. It opened its mouth and Laura's voice came out. "Owen, it's me. Don't you recognize me?" A twisted sense of anger bubbled up. "That's not funny!" The creature took another step forward. Without thinking, I swung the poker. It connected with a dull thud against the creature's arm. It let out a sound, a mix between a laugh and a snarl that sent a shiver down my spine. It lunged at me and we both fell to the floor. Its claws tore at my jacket, narrowly missing flesh. The stench of its breath was overpowering, a foul mix of decay and damp earth. I kicked upwards, pushing it off me. Scrambling to my feet, I made a dash for the door. The creature was fast, but the cluttered cabin slowed it down. Bursting outside, I ran blindly into the woods. Behind me, the creature gave chase, crashing through the underbrush. The fading light made it difficult to see, but I didn't dare slow down. Branches whipped at my face. Roots threatened to trip me with every step. Ahead, I spotted a narrow ravine. Without time to think, I leaped across, barely making it to the other side. I heard the creature skid to a halt behind me. For a moment, there was silence. Then it began to mimic again. This time it was my own voice. "Help! Somebody help me!" The effect was unnerving. Hearing my own pleas echoed back at me almost made me stop, but I pressed on. After what felt like hours, I emerged into a clearing. Moonlight illuminated an old maintenance shed we hadn't used in years. I ducked inside, bolting the door behind me. The shed was small, filled with rusted tools and old equipment. I searched frantically for anything useful. In the corner, I found a flare gun with one shot left. A scratching sound came from the door. Then the creature spoke in another voice, my father's, whom I hadn't seen in years. "Son, open up, it's okay." My hands shook as I loaded the flare gun. "You're not real," I whispered. The door creaked as the creature began to force its way in. Wooden splinters flew as its claws tore through. As it squeezed through the gap, I fired the flare gun. The bright light hit the creature square in the chest, igniting its fur. It let out a shriek unlike anything I'd ever heard, thrashing wildly as flames consumed it. Seizing the moment, I kicked open a loose plank on the side of the shed and slipped out. The creature was distracted, giving me a precious few minutes to put distance between us. I stumbled upon an old service trail and followed it until I saw headlights in the distance. A park maintenance truck was idling. 2 rangers inside finishing up their rounds. Waving my arms, I shouted, "Hey, over here!" They saw me and pulled up. "Owen, what the hell happened to you?" One of them, Mark, asked, eyes wide. "There's something out here. We need to get back to the station now." They didn't ask any more questions, sensing the urgency in my voice. As we drove away, I glanced back toward the tree line. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a pair of eyes reflecting in the darkness, but it could have been a trick of the light. Back at the station, I reported everything. A search team was dispatched, but they found no trace of the creature, just the burned remains of the shed and strange tracks that led nowhere. Officially, it was written off as a bear attack, with the fire attributed to a faulty propane tank. Unofficially, those of us who knew kept a wary eye on the woods. A week later, a group of hikers went missing in the same area. Their bodies were found days later, showing signs of an animal attack, though the details didn't add up. The patterns were too erratic. The injuries unlike those from any known predator. The park was temporarily closed for investigation. Specialists were brought in, but no definitive answers emerged. As for me, I took some time off. The wilderness that once felt like home now seemed alien, every rustling leaf a potential threat. Before I left, I installed additional warning signs around the perimeter of that section of the park. One of the maintenance guys laughed, saying I was being overly cautious. "Better safe than sorry," I replied with a half-smile. As I packed up my truck to leave, Mark approached me. "Heading out?" "Just for a bit," I said. "Take care of yourself, Owen. We'll hold down the fort." I nodded. "Keep an eye out, okay?" He gave me a curious look, but didn't press further. Driving away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something old and cunning was out there, something that didn't appreciate uninvited guests. The park remains one of the most beautiful places I've ever known, but beauty often hides secrets best left undisturbed. The mist hung low over the Tongass National Forest, cloaking the towering Sitka spruces in a ghostly shroud. I never imagined I'd trade the dry heat of Arizona for the damp chill of Alaska, but life has a funny way of turning tables when you're not looking. My name's Leopold Finch, Leo for short. In 2016, I took up a post as a park ranger here in Tongass, the largest national forest in the United States. Fresh air, solitude, and a chance to escape a past that clung to me like tar. That was the dream. Funny how dreams and nightmares often share the same bed. I was always the guy who cracked jokes at the worst possible moments. Maybe it's a defense mechanism, or maybe I just enjoy the sound of groans more than laughter. Like I used to say, I'm not lazy, I'm on energy-saving mode. Not exactly stand-up material, but it kept things light during long patrols. That morning started like any other, a lukewarm cup of coffee and a stale bagel I wouldn't feed to a moose. The radio crackled to life. "Leo, we've got reports of unauthorized hunters near the eastern perimeter," came Janet's voice, sharp as ever. "Copy that. Heading there now." "If I don't make it back, tell my mom I finally learned how to fold a fitted sheet," I replied. "Noted," she said dryly. "Try not to start a war out there." I grabbed my gear and set off along the gravel path that wound through the forest like a serpent. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of pine and damp earth. Birds chattered overhead, oblivious to the human concerns below. About an hour into the hike, I noticed something odd, a silence that pressed in like a held breath. The birds had gone quiet, and even the wind seemed to have taken leave. It reminded me of the calm before a storm, that pregnant pause where the world teeters on the edge of something unseen. I shrugged it off. "Probably just my sparkling personality scaring them away," I muttered. Continuing on, I spotted tracks veering off the main path, boot prints deep and erratic. They weren't part of any trail I knew, and curiosity got the better of me. "Well, Leo, what's the worst that could happen?" Famous last words. Following the prints, I entered a denser part of the forest where the canopy above knitted together, casting everything in perpetual twilight. The ground squelched underfoot and a faint odor hung in the air, metallic and sour. I came upon a clearing littered with the remains of a campsite, a torn tent, scattered belongings, and... was that a shoe hanging from a branch? "This doesn't scream happy campers," I said. unease gnawing at the edges of my bravado. I radioed in. "Janet, you there? Found an abandoned campsite at grid reference 3 Alpha. Looks like it was ransacked." Static. Great. Of all days for technology to give me the cold shoulder. As I surveyed the wreckage, something caught my eye. A crude carving on a tree trunk. It resembled a wolf, but distorted, almost humanoid. Art critic I'm not, but that's one ugly mural. A rustling sound pulled my attention. From the corner of my eye I saw movement. A shadow darting between the trees. "Hello? Park Ranger here. If you're lost, I've got a map, and if you're hiding, I've got a very loud whistle." Silence. I walked toward where I thought I'd seen the movement. The underbrush was thick, resisting my every step. Pushing past a thicket, I nearly stumbled into a small pit. At first glance, it looked like a sinkhole, but then I noticed the bones. Animal bones, I hoped, scattered at the bottom. "Well, that's not foreboding at all," I whispered. A low chuckle echoed behind me. I spun around, heart pounding. "Who's there?" Nothing. "Okay, Leo, either you're losing it or someone's playing a very unfunny prank." I decided it was time to head back. As I retraced my steps, the forest seemed unfamiliar, as if the trees had shifted in my absence. After what felt like an hour, I realized I was going in circles. Panic started to bubble up, but I pushed it down. Lost in the woods, every park ranger's secret shame. I tried the radio again. "Janet, do you copy?" This time a garbled voice came through. "EO, get out." "Janet, repeat that. You're breaking up." "Not alone. Run." The line went dead. Well, that's sufficiently creepy. A sudden scream pierced the air, a man's voice filled with terror. Without thinking, I ran toward the sound. Breaking through a dense patch of ferns, I entered another clearing. The sight stopped me cold. A fellow ranger, Marcus. His body torn apart, eyes wide in a lifeless stare. Blood soaked the moss beneath him, and deep gashes crisscrossed his torso. "Oh no, Marcus." I felt a surge of nausea, but forced it down. A guttural sound rumbled nearby. Emerging from behind a fallen log was a creature unlike anything I'd ever imagined. It stood on 2 legs, towering over me by at least 3 feet. Its body was covered in matted fur, patches of which were missing to reveal slick, gray skin. The face was elongated like a deer's, but twisted, with sharp antlers that branched out like gnarled fingers. "Well, that's not Bambi," I said, stepping back slowly. The creature tilted its head, black eyes reflecting no light. It sniffed the air and bared a set of jagged teeth. I glanced at Marcus's body, and then back at the beast. "Look, if this is about trespassing, I can leave. No hard feelings." It let out a shriek that rattled my teeth and lunged forward. I dove to the side, feeling its claws graze my arm, a burning slash that seared instantly. Scrambling to my feet, I bolted. Adrenaline surged, and the forest became a blur of green and brown. Behind me, I could hear it crashing through the underbrush, gaining ground. "Come on, Leo, think!" I hissed between ragged breaths. Up ahead, I spotted a narrow ravine. Without hesitation, I leapt across, landing hard on the other side. The creature skidded to a halt at the edge, snarling. "What's the matter? Can't jump? Guess those legs are all for show," I shouted, my bravado thin and cracking. It paced along the ravine's edge, eyes never leaving me. I took the moment to assess my options. The pain in my arm was sharp, blood seeping through my torn sleeve. Reaching into my pack, I pulled out a flare. Not exactly a lightsaber, but it'll have to do. I ignited it, the red flame sputtering to life. The creature recoiled slightly. "Ah, so you're not a fan of fireworks." I waved the flare, trying to keep the ravine between us. Slowly, I backed away, but my foot caught on a root, and I fell hard, the flare rolling out of reach. "Smooth move," I groaned. The beast seized the opportunity, leaping over the gap effortlessly. It stood over me, drool dripping from its maw. "Wait, aren't you supposed to be scared of fire?" I stammered. It snapped its jaws inches from my face. Desperate, I grabbed a handful of dirt and threw it into its eyes. It howled, stumbling back. Seizing the moment, I got to my feet and ran toward a cluster of old mining shacks I'd remembered from maps, abandoned but potentially offering shelter. Reaching the first shack, I slammed the door behind me. The structure was rickety, walls full of gaps, but it was something. I searched frantically for anything useful. In a corner, I found a rusted pickaxe. Not exactly state-of-the-art weaponry, but beggars can't be choosers. The door shook as the creature slammed against it. Wood splintered, and I knew it wouldn't hold. "Come on in! Mikasa is Sukasa!" I shouted, positioning myself. The door gave way, and the beast charged. I swung the pickaxe with everything I had. It connected with a sickening thud, lodging into the creature's shoulder. It roared in pain, swiping at me and sending me crashing into the wall. Stars exploded in my vision, but I held on to consciousness. The beast struggled, the pickaxe hindering its movement. Seizing the chance, I crawled toward a stack of old dynamite sticks, probably unstable, but better than nothing. "Time to bring down the house," I mumbled. I grabbed a stick, lit it with the lighter I always kept, a habit from my smoking days, and tossed it at the creature's feet. Diving out a side window, I hit the ground as an explosion ripped through the air. Debris flew and a wave of heat washed over me. Coughing, I got up and looked back at the wreckage. Smoke billowed and flames licked at the remains of the shack. There was no movement. "Guess that blew your mind," I said weakly. Sirens wailed in the distance. Backup had finally arrived, or maybe someone had reported the explosion. Janet's voice crackled over the radio. "Leo, what's your status? We heard an explosion." "Alive for now. Send medical to my coordinates. Marcus is down. There's something else out here." "Understood. Help is on the way." Minutes later, a team arrived. They found me, disheveled and bleeding, but alive. Marcus's body was recovered and the area was secured. "Did you see what did this?" one of the officers asked. I hesitated. It was a bear, had to be. He gave me a skeptical look, but didn't press further. Days later, I sat in the station, arm bandaged, sipping terrible coffee. Reports came in of strange sightings, but nothing concrete. The official story remained a wild animal attack. Janet approached me. "You sure you're okay?" "Never better. Just another day in paradise." She sat down. "You know, if there's more to this..." I cut her off. "Sometimes it's better not to dig too deep. You might not like what you find." She nodded slowly. "Fair enough." As I left the station that evening, the shadows stretched long under the fading light. I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on me, hidden somewhere among the trees. "Well, if you're out there, at least buy me dinner first," I called out to the empty forest. A rustling sounded, but it was just a deer stepping into the clearing. It looked at me briefly before darting away. I chuckled softly. "Jumpier than I am. That's a first." Climbing into my truck, I took one last look at the tree line before driving off. Some secrets the forest could keep. I'd had enough adventure to last a lifetime, or at least until my next cup of coffee. I never imagined that my love for solitude would lead me into such a predicament. Back in 2015, I was stationed at Olympic National Park in Washington State. My name's Thaddeus Langley, but folks just call me Thad. I've always been drawn to the wilderness, a place where a person can hear their own thoughts without the constant buzz of city life. Growing up in a small town taught me to appreciate the simple things, like a good cup of coffee and a bad joke. That morning, I set out on a routine patrol through one of the less traveled sections of the park. The area wasn't popular with tourists, which suited me just fine. I packed my gear, just the essentials, and headed into the forest. The canopy above was thick, filtering the sunlight into a soft green glow that made everything feel alive. A couple of hours into my hike, I stumbled upon something unusual. A series of deep gouges in the trunks of several trees. They were higher than any bear could reach, and spaced too closely to be the result of antlers rubbing against the bark. I took a few photos with my phone, making a mental note to report it back at the station. As I continued, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The usual sounds of the forest, birdsong, rustling leaves, had fallen silent. It was as if the woods were holding their breath. I laughed at myself, thinking I was letting my imagination get the better of me. Around midday, I reached a clearing where I planned to have lunch. As I unwrapped my sandwich, I noticed an eerie stillness. No wind, no insects buzzing, nothing. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A large figure darted between the trees, too fast for me to get a clear look. Probably just a deer, I muttered, though I wasn't convinced. I decided to head back. As I packed up, a pungent odor hit me, a mix of wet dog and decaying meat. It was so strong it made my eyes water. I scanned the area but saw nothing. The feeling of being watched was undeniable now. On the trail back, I found footprints in the soft ground. They were huge, unlike any animal tracks I'd ever seen, elongated with what looked like 4 toes ending in sharp points. I took a photo and pressed on, my pace quickening. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the trees. It wasn't human, but it didn't sound entirely animal either. My heart pounded as I tried to pinpoint the direction. Then I saw it, a massive creature emerging from the shadows about 50 yards ahead. It stood upright, at least 8 feet tall, with matted fur the color of ash. Its limbs were long and sinewy, ending in clawed hands that looked capable of tearing through steel. The head resembled that of a hyena, but distorted, jaws too large, teeth too many. I froze. The creature locked eyes with me, and for a moment neither of us moved. Then it snarled and charged. Instinct kicked in. I turned and ran as fast as I could, adrenaline surging through my veins. The trail twisted and turned, but I didn't dare look back. I could hear branches snapping and heavy footfalls gaining on me. Up ahead, I spotted a fallen tree leaning against a rocky outcrop, forming a small crevice. Without thinking, I dove into the gap, squeezing myself into the tight space. The creature thundered past, unable to stop in time. I held my breath, hoping it wouldn't realize I'd hidden. The sound of its movement slowed, and I heard it sniffing the air. It let out a guttural sound of frustration. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, cramped and trembling. Eventually, the noises faded. I cautiously emerged, every muscle aching. The forest was silent once more, but I knew I wasn't safe yet. I needed to get back to the station and alert the others. As I made my way back, I stumbled upon a gruesome scene. 3 hikers lay scattered across the path, their bodies torn and lifeless. I recognized one of them, a young man named Eric who had checked in at the station that morning. A surge of anger mixed with fear welled up inside me. These people had no chance against whatever that thing was. I radioed in, but the signal was weak. All I managed to get through was, "Emergency at Sector 4. Casualties need backup." I heard static and a faint reply before the line went dead. Knowing help might be on the way, I decided to see if I could find any survivors. As I searched, I heard a faint groan. One of the hikers, a woman in her 30s, was still alive, though barely. She had deep gashes across her torso, and her breathing was shallow. "Hang in there," I said, applying pressure to her wounds. "Help is coming." Her eyes flickered open. "It came out of nowhere," she whispered. "I know, just stay with me." She nodded weakly, then her eyes closed, and she went still. I checked for a pulse. Nothing. I sat back, my hands covered in blood. The weight of the situation pressed down on me. I needed to do something before more lives were lost. Gathering my resolve, I decided to lure the creature away from any populated areas. I figured making myself bait wasn't the smartest plan, but it was the only one I had. I picked up a fallen branch and fashioned it into a makeshift torch using some dry grass and a lighter I always carried. "All right, ugly," I muttered. "Let's finish this." I set the torch ablaze and waved it above my head, shouting at the top of my lungs. The noise echoed through the forest. It didn't take long for the creature to appear, its eyes reflecting the firelight with a malevolent gleam. It charged again, but this time I stood my ground. At the last moment, I sidestepped and swung the torch, striking it across the face. The flames caught on its fur and it recoiled, shrieking in pain. Seizing the opportunity, I ran deeper into the woods, leading it away from the main trails. The creature followed, enraged and relentless. I could hear it crashing through the underbrush behind me. I reached a ravine I remembered from earlier patrols, a steep drop into rocky terrain. With the creature closing in, I had one shot. I leapt across the gap, landing hard on the other side. My ankle twisted, sending a jolt of pain up my leg. The creature skidded to a halt at the edge, its momentum nearly carrying it over. For a moment it teetered, claws scrambling for purchase. Then the ground gave way and it plummeted into the ravine below. I limped to the edge and looked down. The creature lay motionless among the rocks. I wasn't sure if it was dead, but it wasn't getting up anytime soon. Exhausted, I made my way back toward the station, using the trees for support. After what felt like hours, I emerged from the forest to find a team of rangers and emergency personnel waiting. "Thad, over here," someone called. Relief washed over me as I collapsed to the ground. Medics rushed over, checking my injuries. "What happened out there?" my supervisor Mark asked. "There's something in the ravine about 2 miles east," I said between breaths. "It attacked some hikers. They're gone." He exchanged glances with the others. "We'll send a team to investigate. Right now, let's get you taken care of." They loaded me into an ambulance, and as we drove away, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen when they found the creature, or if they would find it at all. A few days later, I was back at the station, my ankle wrapped, an arm in a sling from the scratches I'd sustained. The official report listed the incident as a bear attack, but I knew better. When I questioned the higher-ups, they gave me the bureaucratic runaround. "Let it go, Thad," Mark advised. "Sometimes it's better not to dig too deep." I decided to take his advice. After all, arguing with management was like trying to teach a pig to sing. It wastes your time and annoys the pig. One evening, as I was closing up the office, I found a note slipped under the door. It read, "Be careful in the woods. Not everything is as it seems." I chuckled. No kidding. The next morning, I was back on patrol. As I walked the familiar trails, I kept my eyes open and my senses sharp. But the forest seemed normal again, the birds singing and the leaves rustling in the breeze. Dave, another ranger, caught up with me. "Heard you had quite the adventure," he said with a grin. "You could say that. Think you'll take some time off?" "Nah, the trees would miss me too much." He laughed. "You're a glutton for punishment, Thad." "Better than a desk job," I replied. We continued our patrol, the sun filtering through the branches above. Life went on, as it tends to do, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was holding more secrets than I'd ever know. As we reached a fork in the trail, Dave turned to me. "You lead the way." I smirked. "Sure you want to follow me. I have a knack for finding trouble." "That's what makes it interesting." "All right then. Adventure awaits." We headed down the path, the day's possibilities stretching out before us. After all, what's the worst that could happen? Just another day in the park. Endings aren't usually my strong suit, but if there's one thing I've learned, it's that nature has a twisted sense of humor. And who am I to argue with that? It was 2011 when I first set foot in Congaree National Park, deep in the heart of South Carolina. My name is Asher Mulligan, and I'd just landed my dream job as a park ranger. Growing up in the flatlands, I'd always been drawn to the dense canopy and winding waterways of places like this. Maybe it was the allure of the wild, or perhaps I just wanted an excuse to wear a wide-brimmed hat without judgment. On my first day, I met Elena, another ranger with a sharp wit and a penchant for bad puns. "Welcome to the jungle," she said, handing me a map. "We've got fun and games, but mostly just mosquitoes the size of helicopters." "Great," I laughed. I've always wanted to donate blood without the paperwork. We quickly became friends, sharing stories over campfires and swapping tales of odd things we'd seen in the woods. Elena had a knack for turning the mundane into the extraordinary, making even a squirrel stealing a sandwich sound like a heist movie. One humid afternoon, we received reports of unusual animal tracks near Weston Lake. Visitors claimed they'd seen something large moving through the trees, something that didn't quite match any wildlife they knew. Elena and I were assigned to investigate. She was thrilled at the prospect of an adventure. "Maybe it's Bigfoot finally coming out for a selfie," she joked. "Or just a raccoon on stilts," I replied. "Either way, let's hope it's photogenic." We set out along the boardwalk loop, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and the distant call of birds. The forest was alive, but there was an undercurrent of unease I couldn't shake. It felt like the trees were whispering secrets we weren't meant to hear. As we ventured deeper, we noticed the usual sounds of the forest growing faint. The chatter of wildlife had hushed, replaced by an oppressive silence. Elena frowned. "It's too quiet," she said. "Even the mosquitoes are giving us a break." "Maybe they took a vacation," I suggested, trying to lighten the mood. We found the tracks near a muddy bank. They were enormous, resembling the paw prints of a wolf, but much larger and with an extra toe. Elena knelt down to examine them. "I've never seen anything like this," she murmured. "Could be a prank," I offered. "Somebody with a sense of humor and too much free time?" She shook her head. "The depth suggests significant weight. Whatever made these is big." We followed the trail, which led us off the beaten path and into the deeper parts of the swamp. The cypress trees towered above us, their roots twisting like gnarled fingers. The water beneath the boardwalk was still, reflecting the gray sky above. "Reminds me of that old saying," Elena said. "If you stare into the abyss stares back." "Let's hope it doesn't charge extra for the show," I replied. We came across a clearing where the ground was littered with broken branches and disturbed underbrush. In the center lay the carcass of a deer, torn open and partially devoured. The sight was gruesome, the metallic scent of blood mingling with the earthy smells of the swamp. Elena covered her mouth. "This isn't a typical predator kill," she said. "It's like it was attacked for sport." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "We should radio this in," I suggested. She nodded, reaching for her walkie-talkie. Static greeted us, the signal weak this far out. "I'll try climbing that ridge," she said. "Might get a better reception." "I'll stay here and keep an eye out," I offered. Elena headed towards the rise, leaving me alone in the clearing. The silence pressed in again, heavier this time. I scanned the tree line, every shadow seeming to shift and move. Minutes passed, and I began to feel the weight of isolation. A rustling caught my attention. I turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows. It was massive, standing on all fours but easily as tall as a grizzly bear. Its body was covered in matted fur, dark and slick with moisture. The head resembled that of a hyena but distorted, with jaws that seemed too large and filled with jagged teeth. My breath caught in my throat. The creature locked eyes with me, and in that moment, I felt like prey. It moved slowly, muscles rippling beneath its hide as it began to circle. I reached for my flare gun, standard issue for emergencies. Holding it up, I called out, "Stay back!" It responded with a low, rumbling sound, more felt than heard. Without warning, it lunged forward. I fired the flare, the bright lights searing through the dimness. The creature recoiled, giving me precious seconds to run. I sprinted towards the ridge where Elena had gone. Branches whipped at my face, the ground uneven beneath my feet. Behind me, I could hear the crashing of underbrush as the creature gave chase. "Elena!" I shouted. "We have to go." Reaching the top, I found her frantically trying to get a signal. "What's wrong?" she asked, seeing the panic in my eyes. "No time," I gasped. "We need to move. Now." She didn't question me. Together we bolted down the other side of the ridge, aiming for the main trail. The sounds of pursuit were relentless, the creature closing the distance despite our efforts. "There's a service cabin nearby," Elena shouted. "We can take shelter there." We veered east, our lungs burning. The cabin came into view, a small wooden structure used for storing equipment. We barreled inside, slamming the door behind us. "Help me barricade this," I said, pushing a heavy shelf against the door. Elena joined me, her face pale but determined. Outside, the creature prowled, its heavy footsteps echoing around us. It scratched at the walls, the sound of claws against wood sending shivers down my spine. "Any ideas?" Elena whispered. I checked the room. "There should be a flare stash here, maybe a first aid kit." She grabbed a metal rod, likely part of a broken tool. "Better than nothing," she said, gripping it tightly. The creature began ramming the door, the wood splintering under the force. Time was running out. "Listen," I said. When it breaks through, aim for the eyes. I'll try to distract it." She nodded, her jaw set. "Ready when you are." With a final crash, the door gave way. The creature burst into the room, its presence filling the small space. Up close, the stench was overpowering, a mix of wet fur and decay. I grabbed a flare from the shelf and struck it, the red flame igniting. I waved it towards the beast, forcing it to hesitate. Elena seized the moment, swinging the metal rod with all her might. She struck its head, but the creature barely flinched. It turned its attention to her, snarling. "Hey!" I shouted, thrusting the flare forward. "Over here!" It whipped back towards me, swiping with a massive paw. I felt a sharp pain as claws raked across my arm, but adrenaline kept me moving. Elena jabbed again, this time aiming for its side. The creature roared, an enraged sound that shook the walls. "We can't keep this up," she yelled. I spotted a small window behind us. "Through there," I pointed. We scrambled towards it, squeezing through just as the creature lunged again. Outside, we dashed towards the river, hoping the water might deter it. Reaching the bank, we faced a swift current. "Can you swim?" I asked. "Do I have a choice?" Elena replied. We plunged in, the cold water shocking our systems. The current pulled us downstream as we fought to stay afloat. Behind us, the creature paced along the shore but didn't follow. After what felt like hours, we washed up on a muddy embankment far from where we'd started. Exhausted, we collapsed on the ground, breathing heavily. "Remind me to thank whoever designed that cabin," Elena said between gasps. "Sturdy enough to slow it down." I managed a weak laugh. And here I thought the biggest hazard today would be paperwork. We assessed our injuries. My arm was bleeding, but not severely. Elena had a few scratches and a bruised shoulder from the escape. "We need to report this," she said, attempting to wring out her soaked shirt. "Agreed," I replied. "But who's going to believe us?" She looked at me seriously. "We have evidence. The tracks, the carcass, our injuries. We have to try." We made our way back to the main station, sticking to open areas and staying alert. Upon arrival, we found our supervisor, Mark, organizing gear. "You're both a sight," he remarked. "What happened out there?" We recounted the events, detailing everything we'd seen and experienced. Mark listened, his expression shifting from skepticism to concern. "I've heard rumors," he admitted. "Stories from the old-timers about something lurking deep in the park. I always dismissed them." "Well, it's not a rumor," Elena insisted. "We need to close off that area and warn the others." He nodded. "I'll make the calls. In the meantime, get yourselves checked out." Over the next few days, a search team was assembled to investigate. They found the clearing, the carcass of the deer, and large footprints matching our description. But of the creature itself, there was no sign. The park issued a temporary closure of certain trails, citing safety concerns due to wildlife activity. Officially, it was labeled as a bear attack, though we knew better. One evening, as Elena and I sat outside the station, she mused, "It's strange, isn't it? We spend our lives protecting nature, and yet there's so much we don't understand about it." "Maybe some things are meant to stay hidden," I replied. She chuckled. "That's a comforting thought. Next time, let's hope the hidden things are a bit friendlier. Or at least have better manners," I added. "That one definitely skipped charm school." We never encountered the creature again, but the memory lingered. The park returned to its usual rhythm, visitors unaware of what lay beyond the marked paths. As for us, we continued our work, a little more cautious but no less dedicated. After all, someone had to keep an eye on things, both the seen and the unseen. It was the kind of shift that made me think I should have just stayed in bed. I've been a park ranger in the Mount Hood National Forest for the past 6 years. That's 6 years of mostly uneventful days, except for the odd encounter with tourists trying to climb the wrong trail, or the occasional bear sighting. But the incident in 1999 was the one that changed everything. My name's Hal Worth, and up until that year, I never thought much about how isolated you could feel in the woods. Maybe I didn't think about it because I used to enjoy it. Now, not so much. That day started normal enough. I was on patrol, checking out a part of the forest that was rarely visited by tourists. Too remote, too rugged. Some call it a forgotten area, one of those places not on any pamphlets or maps we hand out at the ranger station. Only reason I was even there was because a couple of hikers from Portland went missing a week prior. My boss thought it was a waste of time to send anyone to that part of the forest, but when their families started making noise, we were told to look again. I wasn't alone. I had Frank with me. Frank Dellinger, an older ranger who'd been with the service a good 20 years more than me. Guy never cracked a smile, unless you counted his sarcastic jabs at every newbie that came through the department. Frank was the kind of guy who could make you feel stupid and give you some weird kind of advice at the same time. Like when I told him I was getting married, and his response was, "Well, make sure you pick the right kind of shovel when you dig your grave, Al." It was around noon when we got to the old logging road, the one that cuts through the forgotten part of Mount Hood. We parked the truck, got out, and started walking the trail that hadn't been walked in years. It was overgrown, and the trees were thicker than anywhere else I'd patrolled. I remember making some half-assed joke about how if the missing hikers came this way, they were either really stupid or looking to get lost on purpose. Frank just grunted, swiping his way through the brush. That's when I noticed something. A smell. It was faint at first, like something had died in the area weeks ago. Not unusual for the wilderness, right? Could have been anything, a deer or some smaller animal. But the farther we walked, the stronger it got. And it wasn't the usual smell of decay. It was worse, almost acidic, like rot and ammonia mixed together. Frank stopped too, his face scrunching up. "You smell that?" he asked. I nodded, trying not to gag. Frank shrugged it off like he always did, and we kept walking. It didn't take long before we found the first body. It wasn't the missing hikers, though. This was something else, something older. What was left of it looked like it had been picked apart. Skin stretched and dried like jerky over bones that had long since been gnawed on by animals. But that wasn't the weird part. What made me stop cold was how the bones were arranged. Neatly, like someone or something had placed them there. Frank kneeled down, poking at the pile with his boot. "Wolfpack, maybe," he said. "Or some freak out here messing around." "Yeah, because that's normal," I said, backing up a step. Frank straightened up, and for the first time I saw something different in his eyes. Not fear, but uncertainty. Frank didn't get spooked, but something about this was making him rethink that whole been there, done that attitude. "Let's keep moving," he said. We pressed on and the smell got worse. Now it was like the air itself was thick with it, clinging to our clothes. I started feeling dizzy, lightheaded even, like I was breathing in something toxic. Frank noticed too, but like any tough old bastard, he didn't say anything. Then we heard it, a sound I can't fully describe. It was low and constant, a kind of grinding noise like rocks rubbing together underwater. I stopped, looking around for the source. Frank did too, gripping his flashlight even though it was still broad daylight. The noise seemed to come from every direction, echoing through the dense trees. Frank gestured for us to move, so we followed the noise. Yeah, that's right. We went towards it because we were idiots. After another 100 yards, we found the second body. It was fresher. The face was... God, I don't even know how to say this, but the skin was peeled back from the skull, not torn, but peeled, like someone took their time with it. The rest of the body wasn't much better. The chest cavity was ripped open, organs removed, some stuffed back inside. It was a mockery of a human body, more like something you'd see hanging in a butcher shop. Frank swore under his breath, stepping back this time. "We should head back, Hal," he said. But before he could even finish the sentence, the forest went dead silent. Now I've been in these woods long enough to know when things get quiet, something's watching you. Could be a bear, could be a cougar. But this was different. It wasn't the kind of quiet where you just stop and listen. It was the kind of quiet that presses on your ears, like a vacuum had sucked all the air out of the place. Frank turned to me and I could see it in his eyes now. Fear. We weren't alone. I could feel it too. Something just outside my field of vision. I didn't need to see it to know we were being hunted. Frank motioned for me to follow him back down the trail, but just as we started to move, there was this sudden burst of movement from the trees. Frank screamed as he was yanked off his feet, disappearing into the underbrush before I even had a chance to react. I froze, listening to the sound of his body being dragged across the ground, the snapping of branches, and something else, something wet, like chewing. I ran. I know, not the most heroic response, but when you hear something tearing apart a man who's been your partner for years, you run. I sprinted back down the path, my legs barely keeping up with the terror flooding through my body. I didn't stop until I reached the truck. By then it was already getting dark, but I didn't care. I floored it out of there, leaving Frank behind. By the time I made it back to the station, I was a wreck. They sent out a search party for Frank the next day, but all they found was blood. Lots of it. The official story was that it was a bear attack, but anyone who's been out in those woods knows better. I tried to tell them what really happened, but no one believed me. I wouldn't have believed me either if I hadn't seen it myself. They shut that part of the forest down, said it was for construction. But we know better, don't we? Whatever it was, it's still out there. Probably sitting in the dark, picking its teeth with Frank's bones. As for me, I transferred out of Mount Hood. I'm in a nice, quiet ranger station now, far away from anything that smells like rot. Still, sometimes when the wind's just right, I swear I can smell it again. That same stench from the forgotten part of the forest, like something out there never finished its meal. And maybe, just maybe, it's still hungry.